The River Tweed, flowing peacefully to the east, but this has not always been a peaceful place. The north bank of the river here is Scotland, and the south bank is England, with this being an easy fording point to cross the river and thus the border. Standing guard is Norham Castle, first built in the 12th century by Ranulph Flambard, who was Bishop of Durham from 1099 until 1128. The main entrance was originally built in the 12th century and was extended in 1408 to boost security, and would have had accommodation above it for guards. Externally there would have been a drawbridge over the outer castle ditch. In return for enforcing order along the English-Scottish border, the bishops of Durham enjoyed near kingly powers during the medieval period. For 4.5 centuries, Norham Castle was one of the great English strongholds strung along the River Tweed, a defence against the Scots. Together with the castles of Berwick and Wark nearby, Norham was a vital part of eastern border defences. The region could be notoriously wild and lawless, sometimes erupting into open conflict. During wartime, Norham's English garrison defended the Tweed fords. Let's head inside, through the entrance and into the inner ward of the castle, now green and quiet, but once a busy place. The importance of Norham was illustrated when Hugh de Puiset, who became Bishop of Durham in 1153, was ordered by Henry to rebuild the castle. Bishop Puiset did this on a grand scale, building a great tower on the site of Flambard's original hall, providing new high-status accommodation. King John also spent large sums on the castle between 1208 and 1212. The castle's strength was demonstrated in 1215, when Alexander II of Scotland besieged Norham for 40 days, failing to take it. In 1219, peace between England and Scotland was signed at Norham. This lasted for most of the 13th century along the border. This is the remains of Norham's own brewery. Weak beer was drunk by everyone in the medieval period because it was usually safer to drink than the water. Stronger beer would have been popular as well, especially with soldiers. At the end is the remains of a circular kiln used to dry malted barley. Next to the brewhouse is the well system, which was built by Bishop Richard Fox between 1494 and 1501. It brought water from a nearby spring along an aqueduct in the moat. Water ran into the square tank, which has steps to enable buckets to be filled. The tank would overflow onto the paved area. This may have been used to wash items, possibly fleeces from the estate's sheep. The water that had passed from the well system, dirty or unused, would pass out of the castle wall controlled by a sluice gate. Remarkably, you can still see the remains of the ovens here, the cove stonework not unlike a modern pizza oven. Beyond the kitchen are small service rooms which would include a pantry and a buttery. The hall, the centre of everyday life in the castle. Food would be served and rituals and ceremonies would take place. Here at the opposite end from the kitchen is the high end, where the bishops and important guests would be seated. this large room beyond the hall would have been the private suite for the bishop and his household. Most noteworthy in Norham's history is an event known as the Great Cause, which took place in May 1291. Bishop Anthony Beck entertained Edward I and his advisors at the castle. The king was arbitrating between 12 competitors for the Scottish throne. In 1292 a judgment was made in favour of John Balliol at nearby Berwick Castle. Balliol paid homage to Edward in Norham's Hall 3 days later. Balliol was treated as a puppet leader, and Edward's claims of overlord of Scotland caused prolonged warfare in the borders. Even after Edward's death in 1307, en route to engage with Robert the Bruce. The Scots besieged Norham in 1318, 1319 and 1322 unsuccessfully. They tried again in 1327, eventually taking it, though it was restored to the bishop the following year. An earlier well protected within the inner ward of the castle. Below the great tower are cellars with amazing stonework in their barrel vaulting. Just look at that complex stonework. Access to the upper floors of the great tower is up these amazing spiral stairs, which are built into the fabric of the wall. Sadly, many steps are missing, but you can make out the spiral in the wall, where they once were. You can see the doorways up the wall which lead from the staircase to each individual floor. The remains of the great tower are very impressive. There were many building phases between the 12th and 16th centuries, and many alterations. For a while Norham enjoyed a period of relative peace, until that is, it was besieged by James IV of Scotland in 1497. James was supporting Perkin Warbeck, a pretender to the English throne. The castle held out for 2 weeks until an English army could relieve it. James wasn't done there though. In 1513, armed with cannons and a large army, Norham was captured after a short siege. It took less than 3 weeks for Norham to be returned to the Bishop of Durham, after the defeat of the Scots at the nearby Battle of Flodden. The ferocious Scots bombardment had resulted in great damage to the castle, and rebuilding started in earnest. Such was Norham's importance. This work would transform the castle with the new arms technology into a powerful artillery fortress capable of returning fire with great force from covered positions, such as these in the outer wall which faces over the river. The castle continued to be maintained for most of the century, but in 1596 Elizabeth I refused to spend any money on it. Money was tight when she came to the throne. She had inherited a huge debt. The English and Scots crowns united in 1605 and the castle fell slowly into decay. The ruins passed through many hands until 100 years ago in 1923, when they were given over to the care of the state.